Welcome to episode 37 and the third season of Conundrums. I'm Jay Michael. Our guest tonight is Steve Kulls. He was instrumental in exposing the Georgia hoax in 2008, and he's written a book about it called 50 Large. Steve Kulls is next on Conundrums. We're back with our guest, Steve Kulls, who is the author of 50 Large. And this is an expose. It goes behind the scenes of everything that took place during the Georgia hoax of 2005. This is where a couple of guys in Georgia claimed that they had a body of a Bigfoot. They carried on the story on, and it went. People began to investigate the story as to its authenticity, and it ended up on CNN with Biscardi, Tom Biscardi, that is, proclaiming that it absolutely positively was real. However, Steve Kulls was in the background of some of this, and he's here to tell us how this story evolved and everything that led up to that and what he discovered along the way during that Georgia hoax. Steve Kulls, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jay, how are you, my friend?
Man, I'm doing good, doing good. Just a quick mention, I had interviewed you in Pennsylvania back in October. Fantastic interview, and that's coming up on a DVD on Sasquatch Hunters, which will be released later this year. So look for Steve there as well. Steve, your new book is called 50 Large. First of all, why did you call it 50 Large?
Well, there was a point where I had to make the decision to go to Indiana or not to see if this thing was real or not. So in the 11th hour, I got on the phone with Biscardi and I said, "Are you telling me the truth about everything? Is this thing a suit or what's going on here?" And his quote to me was, "Do you think I dropped 50 large on a suit?" And that's how the book got the title, 50 Large.
Uh-huh. But apparently he did. Or did he actually purchase the suit?
Well, you see, there becomes, in my research of the book, and this is just recently found, there is a little dispute. But if we believe in what the investor says, and it makes all the sense in the world to me, and there's documentation to back that up, was that the investor actually loaned Biscardi the $50,000. So in essence, it was his suit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So let's go back to 2005. Word begins to come out, mostly through the internet, that these two guys in Georgia had killed a Bigfoot, apparently, or there was some question as to how exactly they acquired the body. But then go ahead.
I believe that was 2008, Jay.
Oh, 2008. I'm sorry. I said 2005.
Yeah, 2005 was Biscardi's previous flub with Stagecoach Nevada.
Okay, we'll maybe get to that in just a moment.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's 2008, and these guys there's some rumblings coming out. These guys have shot a Bigfoot in Georgia. Where did you get involved at this point?
Well, what had happened was there was I started taking notice on cryptomundo.com, and there were several articles, including one that kind of compared the two Georgia boys, Dyer and Witten, to Nazis or something, and I knew that created kind of a firestorm. Mm-hmm. So I said, you know what? I want to get these guys on the show and let my fans grill them. So I ended up issuing on, I think it was July 25th of 2008, I issued a YouTube challenge for them to come on, at the time, the radio show. Mm-hmm. And the weekend went through, and the show was Monday, I think it was Monday nights at the time. And whatever the case is, a few days later, I get a phone call from Rick Dyer. Or I get an email from Rick Dyer saying to call him. So I call him. So I talked to him for an hour long, and I'm throwing him every forensic interviewing technique I can at him to get him just to say it's baloney. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is towards the end of our phone call, and he agreed to come on the show. We said Witten was in Florida on vacation or whatever. at one point he asked me who Tom Biscardi was. So I told him. So he goes, boy, it's something to the effect that he'd like to talk to him or whatever. And that was that. So a little later in the day, I decided I had contact with Tom Biscardi, and we started talking. And he says, well, I'll get to the bottom of this. We'll figure it out the old-fashioned way. I'll get to the bottom of this. So that night I had the radio show. We did catch Dyer stating a bunch of gross inaccuracies in his statement.
Such as?
Well, he claimed his lawyer was a particular person. It turned out the lawyer knew nothing about what he was talking about. He made the claim that he had sold the body, and eventually later on he would tell us he sold it to the National Enquirer. Found out that was a lie. Yeah. So we had these two little lies that were there. There was also an inconsistency of his story about what they saw. He had one story at the beginning of the show. Towards the end of the show, he had another story. So
your red flags were up at the beginning.
Absolutely.
You pretty much knew or thought this was not real.
Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead and continue.
So the next day I get with Biscardi, and I track down the National Enquirer. I actually speak to the chief counsel of the National Enquirer, who told me, no, he kind of chuckled, we don't pay $1 million for anything. So I called Biscardi back. So he says, well, let's call the lawyer. So he conferences me in with the lawyer. And the lawyer's like, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. So at that point, Biscardi says, well, I'm going to call him up and give him a piece of my mind. And that was it. At that point in time, I didn't do any more investigating. Biscardi hangs up, calls me about 3 hours later, and now his story has changed. He believes they have it. He's feeding me all this line of stuff, and that he's going to fly down there at the end of the week. And I'm going, wow, all this in 3 hours. So at that point, that point, I was just a mere spectator, and I was getting a lot of information from Biscardi. And the first trip down, he was talking about the contracts, and I had given him a lot of doubts because there was information that I had dug up on Rick Dyer that was like, this is pointing even more to a hoax. The guy at the time was in a lot of civil actions. He was being sued and all this other stuff going on. So I turn around and I call him up, and he said, and he's like, okay, well, that's fine. And he hangs up, and he calls me back about an hour later and asks me to basically pen the initial contracts because he's got nobody else. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. That means it's 5 o'clock in California. He's got nobody up to do this for him. So I take down what he says verbatim, and while he's on the phone, I type up these things and I email it to him. And he says, what I'll do is just to prove who they are, I'll ask them for their ID. So he comes up with another story that Rick Dyer was actually named somebody else, Danny Dyer. Well, I knew for a fact now in retrospect that Rick Dyer was who he says he was because I have, these civil records that match up to him. So long story short, he comes away after the first trip with all this belief that it was there. And I kept asking him, did he see it? And it was always, well, I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it. So on the 8th, he makes a second trip. And on his second trip, he begins his stories. Oh, I was right there when they... No, I'm sorry. He took the DNA on the first trip. And he made the comment he was right there when he took the DNA.
So he claimed that he was there with the body, had taken a sample, and absolutely knew that it was real.
Well, he wasn't saying much, but all he would say was, well, I can't say what I saw, but I can tell you I was right there when the DNA was taken.
Okay.
His words. So on his second trip, which is a week later, on the 8th of August, 2008, he flies down, and on the 9th, he begins to tell people, oh, you wouldn't believe this. This thing has basically, and I'm not going to be as crude as Biscardi is, but basically saying this thing had testicles the size of peaches.
Wow.
Or grapefruits. This thing had the size that would make a porn star blush.
Wow.
He was making statements like that.
He's laying it on thicker and heavier as it goes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, and then, yep, I on Saturday, we're going to get the pictures and the measurements. And, and he calls up on Sunday, oh, I got the pictures and the measurements, and here they are, blah, 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 blah. Now, I think it was on the 13th, he goes on CNN. On the or the 12th, he goes on not CNN, Fox News. On the 13th, he goes on, I think, Inside Edition, saying, oh, I touched it, I felt it, I smelled it, the whole nines. Then comes, of course, Bigfoot Black Friday. Now, meanwhile, Thursday night was when the crew was supposed to have picked this body up. Now, my understanding was that the item was supposed to be picked up defrosted.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't. When they found it, it was completely solid.
Okay.
So what happens is what I understand is that Biscardi calls Billette. Billette, are talking, and Biscardi says to him, well, does it look real? And Billette says, yeah. He goes, well, okay, then let's do this.
So do you think that Biscardi actually knew it was not real, or that he was told it was real, therefore he was just following along with it?
Well, absolutely. And some of the research, and let me get a little bit into the research that I've done for 50 Large.
Sure.
After this whole thing came down, I took a little cooling off period because everybody was throwing barbs, and I just kept my head low. And what happened was in January of 2009, I finally reached out to Rick Dyer, and I said, listen, dude, I don't know why you're saying I'm part of this hoax. Basically, he was just mad, and he was, sniping. But he says, all right, let me talk to you. Well, we had another hour-long conversation after that email exchange, and what he had said to me filled in all the, what I had was Swiss cheese, and when I talked to Dyer filled in all the holes in the Swiss cheese. What he was saying to me, he couldn't have known I knew about certain things. For example, my first question was, what was the end game of this hoax? And it was to create a Bigfoot autopsy video similar to like the alien autopsy video.
Okay.
And that resonated with me because during that week buildup, Biscardi had said something about being in contact with the crew that had produced the alien autopsy special. So that all started to make sense to me.
Right.
Dyer never knew Biscardi had told me that, but yet Dyer offered this information, and me, from my notes and recollections of events past, went, that, how could he have known that?
Exactly.
So, and as I'm doing the research, what happens is I go down and I actually meet them for the first time. I mean, people don't understand. I had never even been into Georgia at that time to do any research, other than maybe once or twice in my life stopping over Atlanta Airport for a layover. So this is the first time I was actually on the ground in Georgia when I met Dyer and Witten in February of 2009. And I got to say, Rick was very accommodating because I wanted to see this. I wanted to see the site where they picked the body up. I wanted to see the site where they signed the contracts. And I said, Rick, do you have the freezer receipt? And he says, no, but let's go down to the store and we'll get a copy of it. So we actually went down to the store, and, the pictures of the store in the book, picture of the floor models in the book, and we actually got the receipt. And, Dyer went down there into the customer service, told the woman behind the thing, I was in here in August to buy a freezer. Can I get a copy of my receipt? I need it. The woman starts looking on the computer. What's your name? He's like, Dyer, Rick. She prints out something, hands it to him. He hands it to me. It's the freezer receipt. Coincidentally dated the same night Biscardi flew in on his second trip.
Okay.
So
that's important.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. That's important because you're saying that you think that Biscardi was involved in actually buying the freezer to put the thing in?
No, I'm in it saying that Biscardi could have never seen it frozen solid.
Right, before that date.
Right.
Okay, so this gives us a definite date of when that freezer was there, and he had been there before, and there's no way it could have been frozen before that.
Right.
Okay.
And there's no way on his second trip it could have been frozen because that freezer actually holds, it's a 24.9 foot cubic, or 24.9 cubic foot freezer, and that holds about 180 gallons of water. Now, I figure, let's take out, about 50 gallons of water for displacement. just on a conservative side. 135 gallons of water in that type of freezer, it's going to take more than a few days for it to freeze solid.
Right.
So even if Biscardi got there and they opened up the freezer, he could have obviously seen that this was not the real thing. He couldn't have been duped.
So as a good investigator, you're establishing a timeline here. Did you
Absolutely.
tell anyone along the way that you're finding out this thing is a hoax? Did you say anything to anyone, or were you keeping it to yourself at this point?
I had my suspicions because one of the first things that had come across was after that fateful radio show I did, was somebody had called me up and said that you were wrong about the DNA report. And I'm like, what do you mean I was wrong? Well, see, I had been in the air at the time of the press conference. Biscardi on the 11th of August had sent me a DNA letter that he altered to make it look like the DNA said human/ape, not human/opossum.
Oh.
And that was my first inclination, was after that show, realizing that Biscardi was up to something, and concrete-wise.
Who did you have the DNA thing done through? Do you know who that was?
He had the DNA done through Dr. Kurt Nelson of the University of Michigan.
And he had said, okay, this is showing a possum. And
right, it's showing human blood with a possum.
And he doctored it.
And Dyer explains that to me, and that's in the book, but it's kind of a footnote to the whole thing.
Okay.
Really. But establishing that, now, it wasn't really until March of 2009, I brought the radio show back for a little while, but I still wasn't up to my game yet, and my heart wasn't in it fully yet. And I was starting to exposing a little of this stuff. But really, it started with a little blog I started in August of 2009 called the Biscardi Exposed blog. It was on WebJam. And eventually, I turned that whole blog into as the Hall of Shame page that's on my website now.
Right.
So I brought SquatchDetective.com back January 1st, 2010. And we've been, full steam ahead since. But, slowly things... The receipt was a really big part of it.
Right. That weekend that they went on the air on CNN on Friday night proclaiming they had this thing, and you were in the air part of this. There were a lot of people that were demanding, from you to find out what's going on. Come on, tell us what. And you were kind of in a fix at that point. You didn't tell us about how that was happening, because you were sort of between a rock and a hard place there.
I was, and number one, I was in an enemy camp.
Right.
I wasn't getting paid till the end of the week, and I didn't have any money to get myself home at that point in time, too. But somebody did come up with a ticket for me. Unfortunately, I ran into a dilemma. They wouldn't let me go home on Sunday. They said, "Oh, we got the press coming out. We can't let you go home. We got to be here."
Right.
Okay. Well, I can't go home Monday, otherwise I'm going to miss my own show. And I felt it kind of obligatory to tell people that, hey, this thing's a hoax.
Right.
Let's carry on. Well, maybe not necessarily ready to tell what had occurred. And there was a lot of things that had occurred over the weekend, one of them pertaining to a cover-up attempt by Biscardi, which not only did Java Bob Schmalzbach, the Searching for Bigfoot vice president, admit to in March of 2010 on Squatch Detective Radio, but I found out he also admitted to it in the police report.
Wow.
So I have that in writing in his statement in the police report. So there's no disputing that Biscardi tried to cover this up now.
Right.
But at that time, I remember that Sunday morning before the show was on Monday night, and I remember there was an incident where Brian Mazzola, who was the cameraman in a show of really being a journalist, said, "Tom, I was too pissed off to say anything. I mean, I was literally after the cover-up attempt. I think I said maybe about 25 words, really, at that point in time. I was just
right.
But Mazzola asked Biscardi, what did he really see? And Biscardi was like, well, I went down there. They opened up the freezer. There was a little bit of the head sticking up out of the ice. I touched it once. They closed the freezer, and they said, there, that's enough. Now, it was in the ice. Well, we all know that from getting the receipt, then that's not possible.
Right.
Not possible. But anyway, after that was said, Biscardi's son, TJ Biscardi, got up, hung up the conference call phone, and stormed out. So I find, I go down to the stream there, Biscardi sitting there, Junior is sitting there, and I felt bad for the guy. He's in tears, and he's in tears for a very good reason. Is because his kids were getting a lot of spotlight on Friday, saying, oh, their grandfather's just. So at that point, I realized, and I know his kids always used to listen to my show because I knew their screen names and they always used to be in the chat rooms. So it became to a point where, these kids are going to go through a lot on Tuesday as it is. And, I remember, TJ crying, basically saying my kid's got to take all this crap because of him. And he was furious at his father. And, it hit me right in the heart because it's like, well, I could sit there and say, well, that son of a bitch lied to me and all this other stuff. But really, I just wanted to say, listen, it isn't real. Everybody go home. We'll explain it another day. And unfortunately, I when I was asked if he was duped at the time, I even reluctantly said, well, I think so. And that's pretty weak for me. And I don't normally say that. And I don't think people ever caught that I don't normally say anything. Then Kathy Strain got on the show and she started lambasting me. And I didn't disagree with her once.
Right.
I was like, thank you, Kathy. Because I understood that, but I was also, the whole show was being monitored at the time. I was doing the show in the main house. They were out in the safe house, and they were monitoring the show. And at the same time, they were also on the phone with Biscardi. I'm sure of it, because when I got out there, Jabba Bob was hanging up the phone real quick.
Now, let's go to that weekend again where you're there with the freezer, and you're opening it. Tell us about what it was like to discover this thing and what it really was.
Well, let me explain to you. When I first got there, it was Friday. I got in the airport. I think it was like right around 6 o'clock. It was just beginning to get dark. And I got there and I took a peek, and I looked at the eyes, underneath the ice, and I could see the glazing. So then when I got there, Biscardi called, well, what do you think? Can you see the eyes? Do they look real? And the eyes did look real. Of course, they were real eyes. They were real cow eyes. So there was no doubt to me the eyes were biological. So that night, TJ and I were sitting up, and we stayed up till about 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we were listening to Coast to Coast. And this guy had claimed that it was his suit. And the guy was so certain, TJ and I just looked at each other. So we nodded off to sleep, and about 5 o'clock in the morning, TJ shakes my foot because I was asleep in a chair, my feet up. He says, come on. So we go into the freezer. He opens up the freezer. He grabs the thing by the head, and he plucks some hair out, and he goes, here, see if it's real. I mean, he wanted to know as soon as possible because he had his doubts. I knew when we looked at each other, we didn't have to say anything to each other that night we were listening to Nori. So, of course, I'm looking at it. I put it on a newspaper. I get a magnifying glass, and I can see right through it.
Right.
This is nylon.
It's synthetic hair.
It's synthetic. And, of course, we get, Jabba Bob up, and we both at the same time. It was kind of the funniest thing. We're like, well, how can we test if they're real? And both time we said, burn it at the same time. It was really funny. So we burned it, and the thing crawled right up into a plastic ball.
Right.
Game over. But Jabba Bob, see, this is what I got kind of, Jabba Bob, well, we don't know for sure. What do you mean we don't know for sure? That's a plastic ball. Well, that's, So it looks like Jabba Bob was trying to buy some time. He calls up Biscardi. And Biscardi's first reaction is like, okay, all right, well, go ahead, speed up the going out process. I'll go over to the hotel and talk to the boys.
And that's what you're doing at this point.
Nothing.
That's what you were doing at this point. You were trying to thaw the whole thing out, and this was taking time. Okay, go ahead.
Correct. And in our first conversation with Biscardi, there was no anger whatsoever. So we get in there and we throw a salamander in it. He did the back of that truck up so bad that we started to melt the insulation in the freezer.
Oh, goodness.
But eventually, it took us a few hours, but we got to a point where we could break off the back of the foot of the ice, and I reached down there and I pulled up a rubber foot. Game over.
Right.
Game over. So Biscardi, we tell Biscardi again. Biscardi's cool and calm. All right, well, all right. I'm gonna go over there and I'm gonna have a talk to them. And that was that. Not what? None of this. Very atypical for Biscardi.
Exactly. That if I discovered that the thing I thought was a real Bigfoot was actually fake, I think I'd be livid. I would be climbing the walls. But he just took it very calmly.
I wouldn't have been over there to talk to him. I would have gone over there as a bazooka.
Exactly.
But now, a few hours after that, Biscardi comes up with, here's what we're gonna do, and I just need all you guys. Now, at the time, J.C. Johnson, Leonard Dan, and Bill Lett were all off the property. They were going to wrangle up some breakfast for us, or lunch for us. It was probably about 11-ish or so, 11:30-ish noontime when this was going on. I wasn't really looking at my watch, and this whole thing was kind of like in slow motion at the time.
Right. And you realize at this point you're kind of stuck in this situation now where you've somewhat endorsed this thing and now you're finding out.
Well, no. That's the big thing. Mm-hmm. Throughout the whole time, I never endorsed that this thing was real. Mm-hmm. I was very careful about that.
I think a lot of people inferred, though, they thought that the fact you were there, maybe you were endorsing it, but you really weren't. You weren't at all.
I was, see, what a lot of folks don't know was for 3 years, about 2 years previous to this, I was investigating Biscardi's company all along.
Oh, okay.
And to prove that, I have contracts that predate this hoax that I've gotten from sources within Searching for Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. And it's been an ongoing thing. And there's a few researchers who know that was my original goal. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there to have fun. I'm going to be there to enjoy myself and learn. But I'm also going to be there to call them on any BS.
Right.
And I left the only real time I was with the expedition team was for about 4 expeditions. One in October, November, one in of 07. Then there was November, December 07. Then there was 2 in 08. And by April of 08, I was done. So I'd only been on 4 expeditions with them. And that was really about it. I've been on a couple of other trips where I stayed a few days, a couple to Texas, one to Kentucky. That was really my only real time with them.
So,
but each time
prior to 2008, you had a good working relationship with Biscardi and his company.
I wouldn't say it was necessarily a good working relationship.
But they trusted you.
I wouldn't say they totally Biscardi. No. There's a funny point in the book, which I'll go over, which just goes to show you how far Biscardi trusts everybody.
Yeah.
And it actually had to do with I was going to do the Honabi. I was slated to speak at the Honabi conference, I think, in 2007. Mm-hmm. I couldn't make it because of financial reasons, but because 2007 is when my divorce was. So,
right. Okay.
But anyway, for some reason, the newspaper and the person organizing that told him instead of I was a former private investigator, told him I was a former FBI agent. Wow. Now, when Biscardi read that, we were in the middle of the road somewhere, and Biscardi, serious as cancer, turns to me and says, "Can you answer me an honest question?" And he looks at me and goes, "Are you really an FBI agent?" That's how much he trusts his people. Right?
What did you say?
What I said was no, because I was kind of laughing about it. No, but you know what I should have said?
You should have said yes.
That's right, Mr. Carmine Biscardi. Please take me to the nearest field office immediately. That's what I should have said to him. But I didn't.
At least they allowed you into this whole situation that was going on. You were able to get into an area where I think most people probably couldn't have got into the inside.
Well, there's a catch-22 there.
Yeah.
Number one, I got invited by Rick Dyer originally on that original radio show. Right. He was only going to allow 3 people to see it. Myself, Ditch Doctor, who is a BFRO curator, and Tom Biscardi.
Okay.
So they had a little falling out with Ditch, but I was there, and the other fact was Biscardi didn't pay me to go out there. In fact, that was his first thing. Well, I'm going to go to Indiana. I want to see this thing. Well, I can't pay for you to go out there. That's okay. I'll pay for myself.
Right, and I think that's another thing too, is that some people may have assumed that you were on Biscardi's payroll. You were not. You were doing this completely independently.
At this time, at that time, yeah, I'd been done with Biscardi's group since April of 2008 when I left the expedition team. That was it. I didn't get a dime from them after that.
Okay, all right. You've found the freezer. You've thawed it out. It's obviously a rubber foot and a rubber head. What happens after that?
Well,
and by the way, they put a lot into this. They stuffed it with animal parts and various different things so that DNA evidence would come up as just strange, right?
No. Well, according to Dyer and Witten,
yeah,
and I gotta say that I believe them when they talk about this, because I've seen evidence, and like I say, the evidence for 50 large. This is the book. This is all the research for the book. And just so people understand how much research has gone into that, that's a pretty thick Panaflex folder worth of paperwork.
There's a lot of files there.
There's a lot of documents there.
Yes.
I mean, this isn't just notes.
You are known for doing your research. You are known for getting to the bottom of things, doing your research, crossing all your T's, dotting all your I's. And we in the Bigfoot community really appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jay. But what he had, according to Witten and Dyer, he had coached them to take the animal part and bleed onto it. So as to make the DNA corrupted.
Right.
And he goes, worst case scenario, it'll come back, and we'll just say it came from the stomach at that point. Of course, he made comments to other people it came from the arm.
Right.
But the final touch, according to Rick Dyer, was Biscardi spray painting the face black. And I can agree with that because when we started defrosting this thing, the water looked really grayish. And we couldn't understand why. And there was these little black flecks. And what that was the paint coming off the mask because they didn't allow the paint to cure when they started to freeze it.
And it's further proof that he saw it before it was frozen because he was able to spray paint the mask and make it look darker.
Well, he was also able to describe the teeth, the tongue, the eyes. The mask is kind of, the spray painting of the mask that's kind of subjective because that's kind of like Dyer says he did it. Biscardi, well, that's the funny thing. Biscardi's never denied anything. If anybody ever realizes that, he's never denied anything. All he says is, I was duped. But he never denied. He never denied covering up the hoax, trying to cover it up. He never denied spray painting the face. He never denied buying the paint with a credit card at the auto parts store. He's never denied any of this. He just doesn't talk about it.
Right, and this is something that actually I didn't know about, the spray painting the face. I had never heard that part of it. Is it true they put the tongue of a cow in it to make it look real? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So they did. They put a bunch of stuff in there.
They put in it.
The false teeth that they put in it. Goodness gracious.
I'm sitting there listening, and actually, it's quite a funny story how he's setting this up, and the funny thing was the whole thing was he goes, Dyer's a car salesperson. He does his own little business, and he threw when he got the carcass, he threw it in the back of a Cadillac, and he thought that was funny. I'm driving a Cadillac, I got a pig carcass in the back of it.
So now the words come out. They crashed a couple of websites with the information, leaking out that this thing was fake. You're on your way back home or whatever. What happens after this now to you? After this whole thing has now come out that it's fake?
Oh, well, it wasn't so much because it's fake. I think a lot of people wanted blood that day. They wanted Biscardi's head on a platter. Unfortunately, I have a high ethical standard, and in order to, I can't accuse somebody of doing something just because I think so, or because they lied to me, or because of any of that. That's, that's high school stuff, really.
Right.
I'm a professional investigator. What it takes to accuse somebody is something like this.
Right.
That's what it takes to accuse somebody. So when I said I think so, that was about the weakest thing I could do at that point to say he did it.
Right.
I mean, I couldn't say he did it. I had no evidence. So people got offended by that, and I was taking a lot of hits for just saying I think so.
You were.
Well, how can you say that when he lied to you? Well, you know what? I've had people lie to me all the time. It doesn't mean they're involved in a it's a different thing to lie about one thing,
right,
and to actually commit a fraud.
Right.
Big difference.
You have to have the evidence. And it's the same with Bigfoot.
Exactly.
I mean, you can produce photos, you can produce audio clips and things like this. What's really it's gonna come down to is actual physical evidence. And in an investigation, as an investigator, you're aware of this. You have to have, before you go accusing someone, because you could be liable, you have to have evidence.
And that's the thing. That's not, and I won't do it just because it's popular either. Hey, if somebody, I remember doing the Lizard Man investigation. People saying, "Oh, they made those they made those marks in the van." I was like, "No, you can see the underbites." So no, I won't agree to something just because it's popular. I stick to my guns. I stick to what I've been trained to do, and that's go where the evidence leads you. I can't make an accusation without the evidence. Then it's just a hypothesis, and But then again, you don't always want to show your cards too.
Right.
So I got back, and that's after that whole thing came out, that I made that statement. That's when I got the first little piece of evidence, which was somebody telling me, no, the DNA report was different. And when I learned of that changed things in a huge, huge way. Now I can understand why there was a cover-up. There was something else at play here. Biscardi put the cover-up out there to act like he was trying to protect his reputation. In actuality, he was opening the door so he could do whatever he wants in that freezer, i.e. make an autopsy video.
Right. Now, that was his plan all along, to make an alien autopsy, but it would be a Bigfoot autopsy movie and make a lot of money off of it.
Well, yeah. And it's funny, there's a lot of things and people say after the fact, well, what was Biscardi, Jabba Bob Schmalzback, and I wish I had known this then that I know now. And that's in May of 2010 when Schmalzback, he goes, well, I don't see any motive that Tom Biscardi would have had. It's too bad I didn't know some things, because I found out, and it's officially documented, I mean this is well documented, that searching for Bigfoot, CFO, or former CFO, David Nielsen, who was Biscardi's chief investor in 2008, it's where he got all his money from, well, he had filed bankruptcy in May of 2008. And by the end of 2009, the CFO was indicted on 31 counts of fraud. And by the end of 2011, he had pled guilty to those charges. So there's all kinds of, but that's the main reason why, because Biscardi was out of money. Supposed to have museums built. They're not built, not anywhere near built. Strange, the guy has taken investment monies from different people over a course of 6 years now for museums, and not one single museum has even broken ground. That's a bit strange. But what's even stranger is here's a hoax, I'm not involved, and then you find out that Mr. I'm not involved, well, his chief financier files bankruptcy in May.
Did Biscardi, Dyer, or the other guy, did any of them make any money off this through some venture because of it? Have they made any money off of it?
I think Dyer and Wint made $50,000.
That was because they were paid by Biscardi, right?
That is, well, Biscardi via Bill Lett. Yep.
And isn't it true also that Dyer now is claiming they really did have a Bigfoot and the government took it? Or what's the deal with that? Well,
it's funny. I've actually been in contact with Rick Dyer the last couple of days.
Oh, yeah?
And, his story is that, well, for the last couple of years, I'm trying to be legitimate, and nobody's paying attention to me, so I got mad and I decided to lash out. So according to Dyer, at this point in time, he's doing another video tonight to kind of take those claims back. It is what it is. I don't know. But I had to get in contact with Rick because, number one, I didn't want animosity with him, and I know he was taking some shots at me. And I was like, hey, what the hell is this about? He thought a lot of this was about vindication and not the truth. And I said, well, did you see I'm coming out with the book finally? And then he was like, oh, because Rick Dyer, Matt Whitten, they want the truth out there. You know, and because Biscardi's the only one that hasn't said, you know, hey, I'm involved in this.
We all, as the audience, as the Bigfoot community, and then the public in general, we're taking on a roller coaster ride with this thing. I mean, it was just this build up and build up and build up, and then finally just dropped out that it wasn't real. And it affected the Bigfoot community a great deal. A lot of people left, and a lot of people were just like, you know, you can't trust anything now. It hurt a lot of feelings. How did this affect you, knowing that this had taken the whole community for a ride?
It pissed me off, and I say it mildly. And the man I don't blame Dyer and Whitten. I mean, on their own, you know, face value, we all knew this. You know, we everybody could see that this is probably not on the up and up. It wasn't until Biscardi that took it to this level of lying and deceit and putting it into the internet and making it a international circus.
Right.
To me, he's the number one blame. You see, but Biscardi runs that kind of game. If we go back to 2005, Stagecoach Nevada, there's another organization that was kind of starving for money at the time, Biscardi's Great American Bigfoot Organization. And that was starving for money. So, okay, June, we're going to put these webcams up and to start a subscription service in Happy Camp, California. And then within 2 months, we have a body. We have a live one captured. And he lets this go on for a week.
Right.
Week and a half. And then, oops, I was tricked by some sick old lady.
Many people don't realize.
We never knew who that old lady was.
Many people don't realize he had done this before. Tell us about the Happy Camp situation. What happened?
You know, it's kind of like this. Is the scenario the way he says it the first time around possible? Well, if we forget about 2008 and just take it up to 2006, we can say, well, I can see where somebody can get really stupid and yeah, they can be, you know, rused like that, but not a second time. But there are so many elements similar to this, with the exception of Biscardi got on Nori and says, well, we have scientists looking at it. Well, how can you make a statement like that? We have scientists looking at it. We. Who's we? Not they. We. You know, what does he expect people to think?
Do you think that Fox News and CNN are somewhat to blame for not fact-checking this thing first before they put on an international press conference and allow him all this time and Dyer and them to stand up there and say this was real?
No, not really, because I think Fox News cut it off really quick, or CNN cut it off. I know at least one of them cut it off really quick. When they said they didn't have the body there, they're like, okay, goodbye.
Right. Because all they had were photos.
Yeah. But, we understand the media is to blame for a lot of things. They like, making spectacles out of certain people. And the big, while they take UFOs pretty seriously, and even the Loch Ness Monster, I found that they take a lot more seriously than they do Bigfoot.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the media is so negative towards there being a living creature in the United States, a Bigfoot, and yet other things they appear to endorse it?
Controversy sells.
Aha. Well, and I guess...
and it doesn't matter if it's a news broadcast or not.
And this particular incident in 2005, very controversial, had a lot of people stirred up, and so they just ran with it because it was the thing to do that day. Slow news day, this is happening, let's run with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget, Biscardi had been working the better part of a week of it. In fact, there was a memo from the police department that says that, where Lett made a statement that Biscardi was too busy to facilitate the money because he was busy working on getting a press conference set up. So there was a lot of stuff that Biscardi did putting these outreaches. And when you put an outreach to say, hey, we discovered a body, we have the evidence, we have the body in our possession,
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's probably what he said. Well, we have the body in our possession. They automatically thought that it was going to be there.
How many times or how often since 2008 are you questioned about this situation that happened? A lot, a little?
Now it's pretty much a little, because it's pretty well known now in the community where I stand on the issue and how much of this information I've dug up. And, you know, people can, you know, I kind of look at it this way. The people that start running their mouths and trying to tell me I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm. They weren't there?
You got this?
Yeah.
I ain't wrong.
Speaking of that, when did you decide to start writing a book?
December 2008.
Right after it had happened.
It was a way of me releasing.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, it had to go through several rewrites because there was an ebb and flow of feelings.
Right.
You know, I couldn't really finish that book until I had lost my anger.
Uh-huh.
Now it's not anger. Now it's just driven. You can't be an effective investigator having anger.
Right.
That's why when I really started putting the hammer down, it was when I disappeared.
Right.
For that 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I really started putting the hammer down, because as an investigator, I know I have to just shut everybody off around me and just go to work.
Right.
And that's what I did. And true to my style, you know, I'm like a pit bull on crack when it comes to getting information.
And you're still finding out new information all the way up to recently. I mean, you're still finding new things. You talked to Dyer a couple of days ago.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually still working on getting yet even some more information. I mean, the book is due out on the 20th.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have 18 days before I put it on sale.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still looking up to the last minute to get any new information, because if I get this correct piece of information, if I get the information I can prove that there's a possibility a crime may have been committed by the man from California. Now, I'm not saying that one did at this time, but if I get this piece of information and it turns out to be what has been told to me it is, it could mean there might, you know, the person from California committed a crime, and that would have been tampering with evidence and offering of false evidence.
Okay, let's talk about that. The guy from California, what happened there?
Well, very simple. He said he was going to write a statement, and he never really wrote a statement. What he did was he used
a statement about what? I'm sorry, a statement about what?
Well, as when Billette filed the police complaint, you know, well, who's the parties that have to make statements about what happened to see if this is a crime?
Right.
So you would expect that Mr. Biscardi would be very cooperative with the police.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Biscardi was actually, and see, this is where I am kind of an expert on, because I've been a fraud investigator.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very apparent that Biscardi was not very cooperative. He tried to appear like he was cooperative, but there were certain things he said he was going to do that he never did. He was going to supply, you know, a particular the loan agreement between himself and Bill Lett.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bill Lett claims the whole loan agreement was verbal. Biscardi said no, there was not really only if it was real I was to repay him back.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, you know, and Biscardi's own attorney says, oh, we'll send it in.
And this was a payback for what?
The $50,000.
The $50,000 to put up to get all this thing going.
Right.
And this was a man from California that had done that.
Well, that's Tom. No, Tom Biscardi is the man from California.
Okay.
So let me not confuse that.
Okay. All right. And is it possible? Is it possible this late in the game that there could be some criminal charges brought up on this, or is the time period elapsed?
Statute of limitations is up.
It is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure of it.
So he got he got away with this scot-free.
Well, you see, the thing is that that's the reason why Tom Biscardi didn't file the charges. Mm-hmm. You see, the whole reason why this case got dropped was because Bill Lett wasn't the victim.
Yes.
But it was Bill Lett who filed the report. Now, all Biscardi had to do was file a report and write down what had happened. Mm-hmm. But he never did that. He didn't want to do that. He said he was going to do that in a statement for Bill Lett to the police, but he never does that. Why? Okay. You got to ask yourself why.
Right. And where are all the parties now? What are they doing now?
Witten, I believe, is back in Texas. Doing what? I have no idea. Dyer is in Oklahoma. Apparently still selling cars somewhere along the line. And, well, we all know where Biscardi is. Unfortunately, he's still in the Bigfoot community.
And Witt, he was a police officer, right? He's no longer a police officer?
No.
Yeah. Let's talk about your book again. It's called 50 Large. You say it's coming out in about 18 days. Who's going to be putting that out for you?
It's going to be a self-published. It's going to be available on the website and on Amazon.com, and available for Kindle as well.
And that website is SasquatchDetective.com.
Yep, right back there. Yep.
And you'll find all of Steve Kulls' interesting stories and interesting things there. The book will be available there. He'll have it coming on sale here in just a few days. And also, you do a really good radio show on Sunday nights. Tell us about your radio show.
Well, we actually do a webcast now, so you get to see my mug every week when I'm filling up to it. And, it's pretty much the same as the radio format, except for now we get to show neat videos and pictures, and we can still play audio. So we get to do a lot of neat things now.
Fantastic. Well, Steve,
and
thank you.
Sundays at 8.
Yeah, Sundays at 8 o'clock. Let's get that in there. Steve, thank you so much for being my guest tonight on Conundrums, and we want to have you back soon, okay?
Thank you, Jay. You take care, my brother.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. We'll see you next time on Conundrums.